Enough time had gone by now since Hans had arrived to the island with his father, his mother, and his little yellow-haired pink-bird sister, that he had begun to learn some of the words that Satoo would speak. Not all of them by any means, but just like Satoo was pretty smart and he could figure things out pretty quickly, Hans was smart too and he could figure out things pretty quickly. And so these two smart boys had learned to communicate with each other pretty well. And over the weeks while Satoo had been helping them build a stone wall and get the house built, plant the garden, they had learned, Hans had learned Satoo's language well enough that Satoo was finally able one morning, to come to Hans's house, knock on the door, and tell him in Satoo's language, "Come, I want to show you a secret." Now where do you think Satoo wanted to take Hans? Where do you think he wanted to take him? Up to his secret perch, right? Satoo has a secret perch that overlooks Fire Mountain, and he wanted to share this view with Hans. So they went and they climbed up the trail that's somewhat hidden by bushes and boulders until they got up high up on the backside of a cliff that overlooked the ocean. And then when you carefully would come around one boulder and step out, you'd be on a little ledge and you could see out across the water, and there was Fire Mountain. And Hans, he'd seen Fire Mountain from the level of the beach before, but never from this high, and it was so impressive watching the smoke pouring out of the top of the mountain. And occasionally it would look like a big spark shooting out from the top of the mountain. And then that thunderous rumble that was always constantly sounding that seemed to come from under the ocean floor. Hans had lots of questions and he didn't have enough words to ask the questions, but he tried. So he pointed down at the ocean, he went boom, 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 and then he said in Satoo's language, "Why?" And Satoo said, "Fire spirits." Okay, Hans thought about that a little bit. Then he tried to ask, how far? It was hard to tell how far away Fire Mountain was because it was so big and then there was so much ocean. It was hard to tell. Was it a small island up close or was it a big island far away? And Satoo tried to explain. He knew that it was going to be hard to explain this to Hans because Hans didn't know all the words yet, but Satoo basically told him, okay, you can get to the island and back if you row there with 2 men in a boat and you leave at breakfast, you'll get back at the middle of the day. Because Satoo, of course, didn't have a watch or any way of really telling time by minutes and hours. So that was how he could figure it out, that 2 men rowing a boat could get to Fire Mountain and back from Fire Mountain between breakfast and the middle of the day. And Hans didn't quite understand that. Satoo had to say it a couple of times until it made sense. And then Hans asked, why would anybody go? Why go to the mountain? I mean, it's a fiery mountain, or as Hans recognized it, a volcano. Why would anybody want to go there? And Satoo said, oh, bird eggs. Bird eggs. There was a type of seabird that would not land on Satoo's island. At least maybe it used to, but it didn't anymore. The birds had gotten smart enough to know if they landed on Satoo's island, the people stole their eggs. But they would land on a narrow beach, which Satoo now pointed out. Over there on the edge of Fire Mountain, right down at the shoreline, there was a beach. Not a big, long, deep beach like on Satoo's island of Great Sangir, but a very narrow strip of white sand that only was around one little corner of the island. And when you watched carefully, Satoo could see it better than Hans could. Hans's eyes weren't quite as good as Satoo's, but even Hans could make out, yes, white birds with really long wings coming and landing, and they had nests just right there on the sand, and then they would fly off. And that's where Satoo pointed, bird eggs. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Satoo then said to Hans, Tama is back. Hans wasn't sure who he was referring to, so after a lot of back and forth, Satoo explained to him that Tama was the name of the man who lived in the hut, who owned the hut that Hans and his family had lived in for a little while before they built their house. Oh, said Hans. Oh, okay. So he's there now? He's living there again? Satoo said, yes. Hans said, oh, you know, my sister Marta, well, she enjoyed playing house in that hut when we lived there, and I think she still goes back there every day to play house. So I better tell her not to go there anymore. I don't want her to bother Tama. And Satoo said, oh, you don't have to worry. Tama, he's a kind man. He would never harm a sick animal or a sick person, and he's nice to little children. That was nice to hear, but Hans still felt he didn't want his sister bothering this man going into his hut now that the man who owned it was back. Then, as they were about to talk about it some more, Satoo's sharp eyes noticed something pulling out from the edge of the village bay. It was a boat, and it had, quick count, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 men. It was the biggest fishing boat. Only one fishing boat was big enough to carry that many men. It was his father's, Chief Merridin's. Wait a minute. His father taking men? Well, usually his father would bring him along. Usually Satoo wasn't left behind when his father, the chief, would go out fishing. Satoo felt a bit, well, kind of miffed about that. Why didn't he take me? Hans looked too, and he could see, oh yeah, there's men going. They're wearing very nice robes, nice robes, he said to Satoo. And Satoo thought about that. Well, they wouldn't be going fishing if they're wearing nice robes. Where could they be going? I want to know. But before he could decide to go back home and ask at his father's home to see what was going on, Hans said, hey, come back to my house. Come back to my house. We'll read the book with the lids. And Satoo loved that so much he was willing to wait a moment to find out where that boat was going, just to find out about more from the book with the lids. So they got back to Hans's home, and the teacher, the big tall man with the hair the same color as Hans, allowed Hans to pull out one of the books, one of the boxes with lids, and turn in the pages until they got to a particular page, and then carefully trying to translate the words, Hans translated a simple verse for Satoo to learn. And it went like this: the Father himself loves you. And this was hard for poor Satoo. Okay, the Father. He understood Father, and himself even, and you. But loves? What are you trying to say? Because to Satoo, it meant the same as saying, I love to eat bird eggs. It was a bit confusing. So he asked, what does that mean? And Hans really had to work, and I think the Holy Spirit must have been helping Hans to try to help him use words that he could barely even understand. And Hans explained it to him like this. There's a God in heaven. He's a great spirit. And he's Father of everyone, yeah, and he sees everyone, and he hears everyone, and he loves everyone. And now Satoo understood. Oh, love, as in he wants to be with them. He enjoys their company. And Satoo didn't know what to make of this. He had lots of questions. Wait. There's a God in heaven? Yes, said Hans. So when your father stands like this and puts his face up like this, is he talking to the God in heaven? Yes, said Hans. And Satoo thought, oh, this makes so much more sense now. Because he had been seeing the tall man with the red hair, and usually after he would looked at the box with the lids, he would go like this and raise his head, and Satoo thought he was talking to the ceiling. This made so much more sense. There was somebody above the ceiling and above the clouds, way up there, a great spirit. Satoo was starting to really like this idea. Oh, wait a second. This makes sense. And he asked Hans, so is when your father makes the sounds with his mouth and sings, is he singing to the God in heaven? Yes, said Hans. My father loves to sing all the time. We sing to God in heaven because then he hears us, and he loves to hear us sing. And when we're singing to him, he can talk to us through the song. This was starting to really make a lot of sense. Satoo loved this idea. In fact, he loved it so much he thought, I gotta go tell someone. I'm gonna go. I want to talk to my mother. I'll be back. And he ran back to the village. Now, on the way back to the village, he spotted Tama. He hadn't seen Tama in a while. And Tama was really one of Satoo's friends, as far as Satoo knew. They had spent much time together. And so Satoo stopped outside of Tama's hut and said, "Greetings, Tama." Tama came down the ladder to stand by him. Satoo said, "The boat. Why did the boat leave? My father's boat." "Oh," said Tama. He went to get the Islam teachers. "Well, why? What are they?" And Tama explained to him the same way that he had explained to Chief Meriden, that the Islam teachers would come back, they would teach the people something new and interesting, teach them how to pray to Allah, and they wouldn't have to stop having devil dances and spirit feasts and drinking and doing things the way they were always used to doing it. And Satoo asked a question that really his father should have asked. But as you're picking up, Satoo might actually be smarter than his dad sometimes, because Satoo said, "Wait, if the Islam teachers aren't going to change anything when they come, why should they come at all?" And Tama didn't know what to say. He just looked at Satoo and thought in his head, "This boy is becoming too smart." So he changed the subject, which you might have noticed sometimes if you ask a question that's really, really good and doesn't have a great answer, the adults might just change the subject if they don't know how to answer you. That's what Tama did. He said, why do you like the teacher's magic?" And he pointed at the house down on the beach. And Satoo's eyes lit up. Oh, he could share with Tama. Maybe Tama would love to hear about this too. He said, "Oh, this is wonderful. Tama, there is a God of heaven who knows me. And I can talk to him. And I can sing to him. And he will talk back to me. And he listens to me. And when I sing, my songs make him happy." And Tama did not react the way Satoo had hoped he would. He laughed. "Oh, not even the smallest spirit in the jungle would pay attention to you, boy. What makes you think that the great spirit in heaven would pay attention to you?" And now it was Satoo who didn't know how to answer the question. And so they both just stood there for a bit, each one thinking of how the other one had said something that stumped them. And then Satoo broke the silence. What will happen when the Islam teachers come?" Tama liked this question. He knew the answer to that one. "Oh, this is easy. The teacher will see all the people following the Islam teachers, and he will get upset, and he will leave." Tama felt his plan was foolproof. Satoo proceeded to poke a big hole in it. "No, he won't leave. And not everybody's going to follow the Islam teachers." And then Satoo turned and walked off to his mother's house, leaving Tama standing there, suddenly quite upset. And suddenly kind of feeling foolish, because Tama realized he hadn't planned for what to do if his plan failed. What if people didn't want to listen to the Islam teachers? What if they preferred the magic of this new, tall, redhead teacher? What else could he do? He needed to make a backup plan. He needed to have some other way of getting ready. What could he do? Okay, that's what he could do. He had influence on the people. People would always come to him every morning. The sun was now up and getting up above the trees. The people would start coming to his house, showing up at his hut. The people who were sick, the people who needed someone cursed, the people who felt they had a curse on them, and they would be coming to Tama to get their problems fixed. Tama would talk to the people. He'd tell them, "Hey, have you noticed the fire mountain has been really upset lately? I think the fire spirits don't like that teacher." And he'd get enough people to listen to that, and they'd start to wonder about it and even get worried about it. And then when the Islam teachers came, he would tell them, "Hey, have you noticed how the fire mountain is not so upset lately? I think it likes the Islam teachers." And the people would listen to him. He could tell them almost whatever he wanted. He knew that. So he got ready. He ran inside his hut. And he started making plans. He got out his small bag of charms. There was seeds and and some dried roots, and then he got his big bag of charms. Now this one he poured out carefully because inside was that dried dead snake, and it had already been prepared now. He didn't want to touch it. The curse could even land on him if he were to touch it. So he poured them out on the ground, and then he separated away from it the goat skull and the snake and the shark tooth, and left the dry snake right in the middle. Oh, this would be so impressive when the villagers came. They would see that Tama had a plan. But the whole time he was working, something kept popping into his head. It was the image of a pink bird. Not a real bird, but that little girl, and how she had come up the ladder and swept out his house and been so cheery and just smiled at him and held his hand and hugged him. And the more that he tried to stop thinking about her and focus on getting ready to tell the people about the Fire Mountain spirits, the harder it was to not think about her. Until finally he realized part of the trouble was that he kept smelling those flowers, the flowers on that shelf over there that she had put there, and in a fit of just petty anger, he got up and took the shell full of the water and flowers. He went to the window and threw it into the jungle. Okay, that'll get rid of it. This little pink bird, it's almost like she has magic of her own. Tama didn't want to think about her anymore. And then he sat and he waited. And he sat and he waited. Nobody showed up. Where was everybody? He finally went to the door of his hut and looked out, and oh, there was everybody, all walking down in ones, twos, and fives down to the teacher's house along the beach. What would they be doing going down there? This was where they needed to come if they were sick, if they had problems. That's where they'd all come before. They were all swallowing the teacher's new magic. He went and caught one man who was walking, and the man had a baby in his arms. He said, "Hey, where are you going? Where are you going?" "Oh, where we go every morning and every evening. We go to the teacher's house. Tama, you should come too." "Oh, the teacher, you don't need to worry. His medicine is good medicine. My baby was sick. It had that same fever like it had a few months ago, the one that you tried to heal, remember? And it was sick for so many days while you were trying to heal it. Do you know, when I took it down there to the house of the new teacher, he prayed over it, and then he gave it some medicine, and by this morning it was all better. Good medicine this teacher has. You should come and see." Oh, Tama's hands were curling up in a fist the whole time. There was feelings in his heart like jealousy and envy and anger. He'd go and see, all right. He'd go and see, and he'd stalk out the land. He'd go, and right up into the house he'd go this time. No more crouching around by the stone walls. He'd go right into that house, and he'd see what was going on. And not only would he see what was going on and see how the teacher was making this new magic, but he'd find a good place to leave a dry, dead snake sitting around. He followed the people down. The large crowd had gathered, all trying to get in through the entrance in the stone wall, and he kind of got swept in with them. Before he knew it, people were kind of pushing him in. Oh, he ended up inside the house a lot faster than he wanted to. And there was a big room, a living room, with all these clean mats laid out, and all the people sitting on the mats, and the tall, really big, red-haired man sitting on a mat at one end. And he was looking at the people and smiling and greeting the children by name. And Tama thought, I need to sit down. I'm looking kind of conspicuous, but the room was so crowded, there was no place to sit. Well, certainly some of these villagers would give him space to sit. He was the witch doctor of the village after all. Nobody even noticed he was there. They were so busy watching the teacher. Tama tried to get a seat in here, and nobody would make room, and nobody would make room, and his anger was getting up again. He was feeling so jealous of all the attention the teacher was getting, and he was just getting ready to just sneak out the back door and come back another day when something grabbed his hand, and we'll find out what it was.
No!